and welcome. It is Blacklisted Radio. It's the 21st day of June, 2014. My name is Doug Owen. Good to be with you here. Thank you for downloading the podcast. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, all of those other usual places, and, of course, the home of this show, blacklistedradio.com, interactive chat room, and many other amenities there for you to be part of the broadcast. My name's Doug Owen, by the way. I'm the senior editor of blacklistednews.com, and most of the news and current events that we discuss here on the show you can find there on the front page of blacklistednews.com. Twitter handle for the show, BLN Radio. And we do this thing usually right around 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, somewhere in that general area. I don't know, looking at the response, I'm wondering if we should be doing this show so early in the AM. I think we're missing the key targeted demographic of people that would actually be awake for this broadcast. But last week we had a resounding call to move the show to another time. So we're looking at doing that. We're also looking at what's happening in the United States of America. Cryptagon.com asks a great question, and that's how we're going to start the podcast this morning, and that is the United States of America becoming a failed state? Thousands of illegal immigrants being housed in FEMA facilities and military bases, hundreds of unaccompanied children arriving in the U.S. daily. Is the U.S. on its way to becoming a failed state? Losing control of your borders is one of the primary characteristics of a failed state. The outpour and devaluing of cash money through the printing through central banks. Not a conspiracy theory anymore. $29 trillion. Hello, $29 trillion secretly injected into the market. So what does that mean? That means that they're creating money out of thin air. They're using said money to give all of their buddies that own the central banks and the Federal Reserve banks cheap money to buy up real assets, real things, from gold to glitter. You name it, they're buying it. We're going to talk about the out-of-control buying spree of the central banks. Ellen Brown, to name drop, did a great piece that was published yesterday on her website that we cross-posted. We'll talk about that too. We'll throw it into the mix here because I think that all of these signs that we'll talk about today on the podcast are definitely huge red flags, indicators that the United States of America is a failed state. And, the definition of failed state is something that's kind of arbitrary, but I think there's some pretty hallmark indicators that Kevin at Cryptagon.com points to. And the U.S., on the way to becoming a failed state? Question mark. Losing control of your borders, of course, is one of many primary characteristics. If you go on over to Wikipedia, you'll find a page for failed states. And here's basically the criteria that you need for a failed state. And we'll look at what's happening in the U.S. right now and compare them. Mounting demographic pressures. Oh, yeah. Lots of demographics and a lot of mounting pressures. The divide, the gap between the elite and the enslaved, literally enslaved, is becoming larger by the day, and the middle-class Americans are not becoming elite. I'll just put it that way. Massive movement of refugees or internally displaced persons. Yeah, we have tons of refugees. We have tons of internally displaced persons. We have wide open borders. We have I don't know how many guest workers on a bevy of different types of work visas that are on the terrorist watch list, that are pilots that they can't find. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's absolutely true. I mean, it's not just Lois Lerner's emails the government can't find. Apparently, there are terrorists all over the place that are roaming the streets. And if that is true, then that's a hallmark of a failed state. Vengeance-seeking group grievances. How many people feel like they are a victim? Everybody feels like they're a victim, and everybody wants some legal loophole payday. Everyone wants their in many cases, rightfully heard grievances, or their grievances heard, rather. Sorry. At a judiciary level, and there's just too many people in this country that have been wronged that are hoping to vindictively pay back somebody or take somebody else down. It's vengeance-seeking groups. Can you even count how many of those there are? I don't even know. A lot. Chronic and sustained human flight. We don't have refugees leaving the United States quite yet, but there's a lot of people that are expatriating and not wanting to pay their taxes. But we're talking less than 10,000 people annually that give up their U.S. citizenship. So for 312 million Americans, or really who knows how many that we have in this country, it's not even a percentage point. So no. Uneven economic development, absolutely. Poverty, sharp or severe economic decline, that's right. We have tons of that. People that, and if you look at some of the interesting photos of Detroit, one of many places hit hard by the economic decline, and really the 2000s really did a number on the economy of Detroit. Changing world, that had a lot to do with it. The complete de-incentivizing of U.S. businesses and manufacturing through tax loopholes, starting really with Bush 2. We can go back to Bush 1 and even Reaganomics, but redevelopment and the investment, the outpouring of cash to create friendly economic partners, and really globalization, New World Order stuff has taken its toll. Let's see. So we do have a huge amount of poverty in this country, but the government obviously not that worried about it. We're more worried about what's happening in Ukraine, and making sure that we do everything we can to dick up all the relationships and all of the treaties, and really all of the work towards bringing capitalism and democracy, wink wink, sorry, to the world. And if you believe that interbinding or intra-Atlanticism or trading or I'm trying to think of the term here, basically intertwining economies and globalization is a way to deter world war and to make people more apt to work together than work in their own best interests, maybe, that is failing. So much of that work, and you got to think about it from a globalist academic perspective too. And I try to put my self in those shoes and think about the world. If you're trying to use the United States of America as a franchise, one, how hard that must be, and two, how upset you would have to be with the huge amounts of misallocation of wealth. And we'll get to that. So a few of the other things, the legitimacy of the state, we don't have much of that left. That is leaving. Progressive deterioration of public services, absolutely. Violation of human rights and rule of law, we document it pretty much daily. Security apparatus, oh yeah. Rise of factionalized elites. Oh yeah, they're working in a faction against the people. Intervention of external actors. Going out and subverting and subjugating people through foreign policy and through money. All of the things that the State Department does, like injecting $5 billion, case in point, into Ukraine. So Kevin says here from Cryptagon, of course, the U.S. isn't considered a failed state yet. I'd suggest that you will want to be far away from it if it actually gets to that point. If you click through the link below, you can watch a video. It's actually a playlist of videos. They play one after another. I watched 5 clips before I'd seen enough. I encourage you to watch some of those, and I watched a few. But it shows you the horrors that are happening on our own border today. And I think that it is indicative of a failed state when you have refugees, when we have a clear disconnect between what's happening on a federal level, the Constitution demands that the federal government take care of the borders, and really any independent state action to control, secure, or to arrest illegal immigrants has been stymied and discouraged by the current White House. And really the Senate has done a great job in controlling that as well. But, I mean, there's plenty of people to blame for what's happening there today. I was talking with the producer of our podcast, the Doomcast, that I do with Charlie McGrath, and we were talking about the border just yesterday. And it's interesting to note that when I was a kid, I live right here in Central Texas, so I see this directly. I mean, a lot of this is in the shadows. Tens of thousands of people being held in FEMA camps. That's really happening, but most people don't see it. People are not aware of it because Texas is a vast, vast state, and there's plenty of stuff that would normally be outside of the eye's view that is now, with social media and the internet in general, and alternative media, is getting out to people, not to mention the whistleblowers and others that have kind of made this issue, which is already a humanitarian disaster, more mainstream in just the last few days, with the release of these images of all of these children that the U.S. government's holding. Well, these are the kind of quagmires that happen. Now, there's no good solution for these problems. The reason that they have become so horrible, I mean, why this is really like metastasized like a cancer, is because of U.S. foreign policy and the destabilization of countries in South America, and also using, well, let's just blame it on the CIA for the most part, I think, because when you have the rise of this narco economy that is used for black budget ops, that used to be kind of that used to be a very taboo take. And if you looked at all of the CIA whistleblowers and other former CIA that have spoken of this, and I don't know how many books are out there on CIA drug running, but it's pretty much the norm. Most people understand how this works now. They look at during Vietnam, the Golden Triangle, and the rise of Eurasian economies through opium, and what the U.S. and other European central agencies have done to create a network, underground network, to destabilize and to ultimately control and subjugate people throughout South America and their governments. And we have a 40-year history, public one, that you can read at the National Security Archive, of messing around and intervening and picking really bad people to be in charge of other populaces. So if you see that and you think that, well, that's just what we do in other countries, we would never allow such kind of clandestine government, secret, deep state government to take over this country, you are reading a lot of fiction. You're quite the optimist. So when I look at this, there's only two ways to see this. Either this is quite intentional, and I think that most of the people in the New World Order crowd, and I am one of those people that are anti-New World Order, have pegged the New World Order and globalization as one of the biggest problems. You are right. You are absolutely right. But one of the keys to a command-control economy is foreign intervention, and the CIA has done that, and the U.S. government has really engendered these bad decisions. I mean, ultimately, they're just wrong over and over and over again. That's my biggest problem. If they did a good job at figuring out who was the best candidate and they could actually get them into office, who could we find? I mean, Hamid Karzai and his drug-dealing brother, are those the best people? And better yet, if they were better at picking winners, not Pinochet. There were lots of other groups that were friendly to U.S. interests that would have been more than happy to take over and could have used, I guess, the cash for their campaigning. But the U.S. it continues to pick the wrong guy, and I don't think that that's a conspiracy. I just think that when you look at things in a very short-sighted view, when you have an operation to conduct, okay, we need to get this guy out and this guy in. You do that. It's compartmentalized, and somebody picks a winner and somebody picks a loser. We've picked a lot of losers. We've picked a lot of really bad people to carry out our missions. I mean, just look at the ATF. Perfect example. I mean, the destabilization of South America, the engendering, the rise of the Sinaloa cartel, using the fast and furious gun runners to import through the CIA and through banks millions of dollars of drugs, giving impunity to operate on the U.S. soil. I mean, those kind of things are even worse than the humanitarian crisis that we have, because number one, we have this failed war on drugs, and number two, all of that all of the people that have been harmed by this, all of the cannon fodder, are used as such because the government is trying to get to the top guy, to go after the big guy. Well, once you get to that peak, once you jump onto the plateau there, and you look around, you realize that at the very, very top of these international drug cartels and these money laundering organizations and corrupt government, you find a bunch of spooks and a bunch of bankers up there. And you're like, okay, well, you guys are running it. So who do we indict? The U.S. government? Anyway, sorry about the squeaky chair here, too. We're not doing the show in the usual location in our Blacklisted Radio bunker studio. But anyway, so I could rail on about this, but it's bad U.S. policy that has created this humanitarian crisis in South America. It's siding with huge multinational corporations that have basically found really, I think, just bad people at the end of the day that don't mind selling out their own indigenous people into slavery for a few $1 million. Those are the people that the U.S. has continued to put into power because companies like the International Fruit Company, Chiquita Banana, BP, those are the people that they want in power. And so when you have that, of course you're going to have more and more and more problems because the people that are running the government don't care about the people at all. Are always short-sighted. Do not have a national fervor for the people. Do not care about them and only care about profits. When you put those kind of people in power over and over and over again, then there's a bunch of people that that cry about it in this country. I'm tired of paying for all these illegal immigrants to come here. Well, there's a lot of other things that we shouldn't be paying for that are pretty ridiculous. But I don't want to just go off on a tangent on that all day long. One of the things I thought was pretty interesting, this 2013 infographic kind of explains what's happened, the misallocation of wealth. Defense contractors have scored over $3.3 trillion since 9/11. Now, wrap your mind around that. $3.3 trillion. Okay, that's a lot of money. And if you can dream it, you can imagine what we could do with $3.3 trillion. I tell you what, we could close the border with $3.3 trillion. And, 10 years ago when, $3.3 trillion seemed like a lot of money, just 5-6 years ago now, $750 billion seemed like a lot of money. People were like, oh my God, that's how much money we need to save the economy. Oh my God, Hank Paulson, $750 billion. It's a different world. I mean, the world is just so fluid now. And, the IMF wants more inflation $50 million flats, apartments, condos in London and in Brussels. I mean, there's your inflation. But, I mean, if you just think about this, and I've looked at the numbers here and how much money has gone out there. In 2002, $173.4 billion. 2003, $215, $234. It just keeps going up. 2008, we spent $402 billion on the military-industrial complex. The big winners, of course, $23.5 billion is Boeing. Lockheed Martin, number 2 here, 22.8. Raytheon, General Dynamics, United Technologies are all in the top 5. 5 states where defense contractor dollars went in 2012. Of course, right here at home in Texas, $24.2 billion. But California, as progressive as they are, actually raked in more money from the military-industrial complex, $31.8 billion. But just looking at this and the money that is spent, the aggregate, I mean, we could almost have a paradise in this country, a socialist paradise. We can have that. You could, with $3.3 trillion, I wouldn't be paying just amazingly high amounts of money for amazingly pathetic, actually one of the worst across the civilized first world when it comes to the services that are rendered for the amount of cash you pay to the insurance company. Yeah, we're getting screwed epically on that. And you can only imagine. I mean, maybe we could take care of some of the veterans. Maybe if we had been a little bit smarter with our foreign policy and not fallen into the Dick Cheney neocon quagmire that is Iraq, that is ISIS, we wouldn't have had to spend that. And this is old numbers. I mean, I can only imagine that it's a lot more now. It's going to be $10 trillion. It's just, at some point by 2020, just a few years from now, I'll be telling my son about these phenomenal amounts of money. We spent $30 trillion, $50 trillion, $100 trillion. Sounds like a lot of money now. It won't mean that much when you're paying, $2 million for a apartment in in a ghetto. I mean, where I live now, we're in the ninth highest the ninth highest cost per square foot in the nation for homes and residences, and I'm going to have to move sooner or later because there's just no way that we can keep up with the inflative bubble. So, there's a huge amount of disparity when it comes to what people are getting paid and what they can afford to live in, and we're seeing more and more of our money going towards homes. I mean, back in the 70s, you didn't spend, this is the general rule, okay, and this is what my dad told me, and I've read into the rule, but the general rule, and you can do the same, was that you spent 25% of the money that you have on your home. So do the math for yourself. Whatever you take home monthly, or even think about it weekly. What do you take home weekly? 1/4 of that, at most, would be spent on your home. So if you make $300, let's do $400 a week, which is probably pretty average in this country. If you're not a skilled laborer, if you're just working in retail or some other service industry, or you're just getting your feet wet, if you're a tradesman, if you're still a greenhorn. $400 a week, pretty reasonable. That means that whatever you would be living in would cost you $400 a month. Yeah, I know some of you are like, ooh, yeah. Think about the places in your local neighborhood that you could live for $400 a month. There's nothing around here that would not be scary for under $1,000 a month. So 50% of your money just to keep your kids out of harm's way and not live somewhere really, really scary can cost you upwards of 50% of your income if you're not making a lot of money. I mean, that's why it's becoming harder and harder and harder for these people pumping inflation. And that's what they are doing. They're pumping the inflation solution to keep the American people and the Western world housed and, gainfully employed. Just, it's so unadvantageous to people in this country to get a job. And that how insane is that? Where there's a demographic of millions of people that do better living off of unemployment than they can actually going out and getting a job. I mean, talk about unsustainable. Talk about something that's going to end up ultimately being a self-fulfilling prophecy. Don't worry, kids. Barack Obama's going to use his executive action or his robotic pin hand, remember that, to absolve all of your debt, and that would be great, other than the fact it would create lots of deflation. All right, so we talked about the defense contractors, $3.3 trillion. Think about that. EU, U.S. threaten Russia with new round of sanctions. This is not good, and this is going to even hurt more U.S.-based businesses that have been doing business with the Russians, but not to mention this, but it's going to end up ultimately hurting Europe. So that would be ultimately their solution for what's happening in the Ukraine. I wanted to mention the Ukraine because one of the untold stories is the fact that just now we've decided to help the Ukrainians. U.S. businesses, these are the economic hitmen, are going to be entering. They have just passed a bill, and we'll see if this actually comes to fruition. I don't think that there's any reason to think it would not, but they're trying to close down the South Stream project. Some of you may have already heard that there was an explosion of the pipeline in the Ukraine right after Gazprom, the day after Gazprom took the shut down the pipelines to Ukraine over failure to pay, which, if I fail to pay my water bill, I'm going to be a thirsty guy here. I'm going to have to figure out another plan. Anyway, conveniently, the very next day, bombing of a Ukrainian pipeline has created two things. Number one, new security policy to monitor and protect pipelines throughout the region, and it's only created more of a divide. And I broke a lot of this down, I think, on Doomcast 46. We recorded Wednesday, but basically how this is a way to bring Europe into this new relevance, or this new package deal for NATO, and to get more and more money out of the European citizenry that they don't have, that they wouldn't allocate towards war if they knew any better. But that's why they have the private industries, if that's what the private oil oligarchies that really do sway and use the U.S. and Europe for a battle-fighting, battle-ready regiment, an army for profit. When they feel like it, they're going to bring all of this into it. But this new push, because of economic terrorism and ultimately the complete destruction of Ukrainian sovereignty, is well underway. Yeah. So I'm looking for the article here that seems to have just disappeared. But there was a big project called the South Stream project, where they are basically trying to create this conduit, this nexus of pipelines to bind China to Russia and to go through the failed state region of the Middle East over to Turkey. The South Stream project. There we go. Ukraine says it will remove the need for the South Stream pipeline. There we go. Euractiv wrote about this. Ukraine's parliament agreed on the 19th to discuss a bill to allow gas transit facilities to be leased on a joint venture basis with participation from firms in the European Union or the United States. Ukraine would hold 51% and foreign partners would be offered 49% in the venture, which would be managed both by transit pipelines and underground gas storage facilities. Suffering a third cutoff of natural gas supplies from Russia in under 9 years, and with the political relations in crisis, Ukraine is desperate to become less dependent on Russian gas, but at the same time to provide more reliable transit for the Russian gas that Europe needs. So Fracademia. Joe Biden, his buddies, his son Hunter, or nephew, says his nephew, looks just like him. Definitely part of the reptilian bloodline. John Kerry's buddies, all these guys are positioned to make a lot of money. The South Stream project is something that Russia has a lot of money invested in, and so this is kind of a blow to what Russia, or what, the BRIC nations, the rise, the opposition, if you will, to NATO would like to see. Obviously, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and their economic interests are going to be hit by this. But this is the economic warfare. This is the chess battle that is being played and waged. And, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I mean, the Ukrainian people, their wishes, their representation, legitimate representation, their best interest are at the end of the spectrum when it comes to what the government is all about. This Poroshenko guy, the chocolate king. Hello, I'm the chocolate king. I get a kick out of that. He has been working in the United States with the U.S. government and the CIA for a long, long time. I'll give props where props is due to Kurt Nimmo. He did a great bang-up piece and did some research onto his history. And Poroshenko was, he's a man that he got a lot of money because of his European ties, and the U.S. has been interested. They've thought that he's the go-to guy for a long time. And this is, a throwback to what we were talking about with South America. The U.S. ends up backing a guy, their guy, and when they get him in, ultimately, if he ends up committing atrocities, which the U.S. has a bad history of, getting in bed with a genocidal maniac murderer. Hopefully, Poroshenko. The idea is he's so rich that he wouldn't do that. He doesn't have to, rape and pillage his own people. Maybe that's the thought here. Well, we don't want some crazy zealot general, or look at the people in ISIS that we trained in Jordan. Okay, these U.S. operators that just happen to have lots of U.S. military weaponry. We'll get there. Anyway, some of the banks out there have been, instrumental in helping this happen. There's a few of them that I wanted to mention. One of which is the Maryland Financial Bank. This is a takeaway, but it just shows you crony capitalism, and that's what's kind of playing out in Ukraine on a global level. You have the Wall Street Journal basically. Putting a little salt on those people that were tragically destroyed by the 2008 financial crisis, the people that were directly affected. And there's this bank in Maryland, which is one of many that received millions of dollars from the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, as it was coined. And they are just one of many, including White Rivers, Bank Shares, Marine Bank and Trust, United American Bank, Royal Bank Shares of Pennsylvania, Market Bancorp, that don't have to pay any of that money back. They just receive tons of money and they put into these federal programs. So there's two sides of this story real quickly. Number one, the government gave mandates and forced banks to take this money. They forced them to take TARP cash and make risky and unprofitable injections of cash into crony businesses and other Fortune 500 or even tax-exempt corporations like the NFL and NASCAR. We heard part of the bailout in 2008, the Troubled Asset Relief Fund went to NASCAR repaving a few of their tracks. So, the amount of criminal activity that the government wanted to happen. I mean, talk about creating patsies, talk about creating people to go after in just a few years to blame for the grandest, the biggest takeover of the financial institutions, consolidation of your choices, literally, ever in the world, the greatest transfer of wealth to central bankers that are buying $5 to $50 million apartments in London. Those people, the few in the elite that can afford some of these just outrageous luxury items that are Maserati, all of these companies that cater from high-end vehicles to high-end homes. Those companies that cater to the ultra elite, the super duper 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 rich, are doing quite well. Walmart. I mean, that's a good indicator. When Walmart's struggling, you know that the nation's struggling. But anyway, just a quick example of the cronyism and how banks are above the law, and how selectively they're going back and targeting different banks. And I think that that's what the Wall Street Journal is really helping to do here, and rightfully so, because there is plenty of crime. I think that the people just get caught up on this small bank, Maryland Financial Bank of, wherever, that had, 300 employees. Let's go after those people. Those are the criminals. But the federal government forced them to give huge amounts of money to basically give money to people that were ultimately subprime, in loans that were subprime. And so they're right in saying, well, why do I have to pay this back? Why should we have to pay this back? Because this is money that was given to us with strings attached. Lots of it. All right, speaking of money and what's happening in the Middle East, that's what it always comes down to. $3.3 trillion. Let's just call it 4.3, because annually the Pentagon openly is in the kitty for $350 billion, at least $250 a year, period. So when all of this comes to, I guess, pass, when all of us, every person in this country by that measurement, by that metric, owes $1,350 for keeping us safe. That's what they would like us to think anyway. But my God, that's a lot of money. It's got for $1,300, I can get a security system and buy a pump shotgun and get a pit bull. I mean, thanks for keeping me safe from international terrorism. The winners and losers are becoming more and more apparent. So Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Iran are now all players in Iraq. What's happening in the northwest section of Iraq. And there's one other player that's always there in the background, always sitting there chewing their fingernails with glee, and it's Israel. Israel to get first batch of oil from disputed Kurdish pipeline. Why is it disputed? Well, delivery signals growing trade between Israel and Kurdistan comes despite U.S. opposition to Kurdish oil exports. So this is a little stab in the back, okay, because they're trying to create more and more control. This is what they're worried about. They're worried about, Israel buying oil from the Kurds. They're not worried about humanitarian crisis of epic proportions that's playing out on the border. Why? Because, there's no money there. It's only money to be spent. The military may be interested in it if we'll spend more money, billions on the digital border, the electronic border fence with all of the sensors and special cameras that were going to photograph all the illegal aliens. If Joe Biden and the crew didn't give a crap, then why spend all the money? We want everybody here. We want every single drug dealer, convict, murderer, MS-13 gang member. I mean, if we can get them here, bring them here, get them on Social Security, we'll get them a job at McDonald's, and they can moonlight making meth. I mean, I don't know. The delusions of some of these people as to what is happening on the border, it's all good. If that's really the plan, then why spend billions trying to secure something that cannot be secured? And it ended up even losing some of these big players cash money. The contractors themselves, there was like no winner in any of those. The winner had no chicken dinner because these companies that provided that weren't able to even get a payday because just like in most things, the promises of what can be delivered are highly exaggerated and not usually what happens. So anyway, Israel will receive its first delivery of oil from a disputed pipeline in Kurdistan in a sign of growing relations between the Jewish state and the autonomous Kurdish regional government, the KRG, in northern Iraq. Now, the KRG are terrorists. They are not friendly people, and it's not a surprise that the Jewish state is doing a little business with them. On Friday, the SCF Altai tanker approached the city of Ashkelon in southern Israel and is scheduled to dock sometime Saturday. The oil delivery is from the KRG's new independent pipeline, which bypasses the central Iraqi government by running directly to the Turkish port of Ceyhan. I think that's how you pronounce it, Ceyhan, much to the chagrin of Baghdad's embattled government. That's right, they want money. They need money for more weapons to go after ISIS and other U.S.-backed and Saudi Arabian-funded ne'er-do-wells. Really, Dick Cheney, he's so astute. He pegged this back in '94, saying that if we had a break-off or a central government that was without a leader and a breakdown in the central infrastructure, if you will, we would have parts of Iraq flying off. And that's kind of what's happening with Kurdistan and these new pipelines. But, how long before the Iraqis or maybe ISIS or the Saudi Arabian private mercenaries blow up this pipeline? So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because I think this year, at least the second half of it, we're going to see a lot of pipeline violence because pipelines are really the key to economic prosperity in the Middle East and in places like Ukraine. Even in Russia, pipelines are key to their whole economic advantages and stability over other member states, and to keep the legitimacy, the necessity of the superpowers like Russia, China, Iraq. I mean, all of these huge governments, some of which are proxy, some of them independent states, keeping them viable and keeping the cash flow that they need. And so, it's not looking good for anybody anywhere, because all the money that they're making, they're putting into domestic oppression tools. The Russians, the Chinese, all of the other anti-New World Order states, the BRIC nations, all are using what money they are making from the oil state and putting that into the police state. So, not really thrilled with any of those outcomes. One of the things that has been key to regime change in a lot of these countries, and that has been a huge problem for the powers that be, is phones. Your operating systems, the intercommunication that they so fear is making a lot of politicians and, of course, developers very nervous. The fact that you, me, and a bunch of other friends can get together and we can just tell Monsanto to go screw itself, and we can start staging civil disobedience actions. It's very similar to the ones that the U.S. supported in Ukraine. You're able to stymie that. You have people, piling upon one another to cross the moat to J.P. Morgan to protest there. You have people in front of the Federal Reserve and their private police force that are causing lots and lots of issues and problems. You've got people in this country, tens of thousands of them, that do not get a lot of media, almost no media coverage, and those are the people that are strapping themselves, handcuffing themselves to operator equipment and pipeline infrastructure for the XL pipeline. I mean, you have a lot of protesters. You got a lot of people that don't get the attention they deserve because the state has two tactics: one, to ignore you, and two, to basically minimize the impact that people are having. But to see this, New York Attorney General says Android Windows phones will have kill switch, is a perfect example of what the state is doing to make sure things like that are not nearly as effective. And I think ultimately, and we'll finish the show with the open source revolution that is here. This came out of Zero Hedge. It's for your own good, remember, of course. As Bloomberg reports, based on studies showing that the stunning effectiveness of kill switches, Google and Microsoft have agreed to New York Attorney Attorney General Schneiderman's calls that such security measures be incorporated into new Android and Windows phones following Apple's inclusion in September, with the Android phones making up 82% of global shipments this year. So everybody's got a Samsung, or they've got, there's other ones, but the majority, obviously, 80% of these being Samsung Android devices. It's going to really empower the state, I think, if they have these kill switches. But one of the things that's happening, this is short term, because we are undergoing what they call the open source revolution, and we've seen that play out time and time and time again. And I don't see why it wouldn't this time. The state has always tried its best to regulate and control technology. Not doing a great job in many, many fields, and this is one exactly that I think highlights why two things have to happen. One, people have to recognize the state being able to control and turn off your phone. Now, some of you might think that's a great idea. But two, this means that this technology is no longer viable. And if you go back to the days of video game systems, or even the early computers, you had a closed garden system. You had a Tandy. Tandy, we had 2600, I think it was. You stuck a cartridge into it. You could type in command prompt, basically. You can go in there and use code and make it say things, and had a big ball. I forget the language. It might have been PAL, Basica, PAL, whatever. For all of you younger listeners, you're like, what are you talking about? There's old computers that were very expensive and it didn't do a whole lot, but they're pretty cool. This one hooked up to the TV, so and then we've got to CLG, monitors that had 3 colors and 4 colors, and before you knew it, it had 12 colors, and oh my God, how rich and beautiful that was. But and that was the way it was until tons of people became, the market of people with PCs became saturated in the need and the desire for people to create and build their own open source systems happen. Android's an open source, well, Android isn't, but the operating systems that underlie most of these phones are the services that people use. That's where they get you. If you want to use this iPhone, you can't crack into it any longer, and if you want to get it on the network, then you have to, take this certain version or update or whatever it may be to enable these services. So this is very initial. Phones are, and that's just, devices other than your PC, your station, that are tied to the cell phone corporations through them to the internet. It's pretty elementary. We're just now seeing the rise of the smartphone. But as time goes on, in the next few years, you're going to be able to create. Amazon has their new phone that's out. Everybody's going to have their own phone, and it's only a matter of time before you'll be able to build your own phone. So these situations, the government, I only pointed out because, one, it's I think it's an exercise in futility. It proves that the government is scared of the people and wants to be able to con us into thinking that this is somehow in our own best interest. for the government to be able to turn off your phone at any time. And basically, if the government can turn off your phone at any time for your benefit, you can only imagine what else they want to turn off. And we're living in that age where your car is tied to the internet, where it's it becomes part of the Internet of Things. You can hack into cars. They have to have black boxes, event recorders, all of these things. So it's only a matter of time before people will want to take those apart and build their own mother brain. They'll build their own systems. And I think as they continue to push this, that is only going to make it more viable. Bitcoin is only viable because people are tired of dealing with banks and want direct peer-to-peer transfer services. Tired of paying a third party. Tired of paying for usury. It's the only reason it's more viable than something else. And it's outside of the system where we have a nation bank, that a national currency system that the government has a monopoly on. If the government didn't have the monopoly, if we actually instituted some common sense banking in this country, then we wouldn't have to worry about it nearly as much. All right, so let's see. We got just a few more minutes here. I didn't want to mention this article from Ellen Brown talking about the central banks and how they are buying up everything. So central and corporate banks are on a buying spree. Why? Because they get money cheap. So finance is a new form of warfare. Absolutely. This comes from Dr. Michael Hudson. This is a quote. Without the expensive military overhead and occupation against unwilling host, it's a competition in credit creation to buy foreign resources, real estate, public and privatized infrastructure, bonds, and corporate stock ownership. Who needs an army when you can obtain the unusual object, monetary wealth, and asset appropriation simply by financial means? It's a great question. Why do I need the state when I've got Blackwater, the Castellas Group, Triple Canopy? Why do you need the military when you have your own Stinger missiles? Why do you need the state when you've got Bitcoin? It's a perfect example of why you don't have to opt into the system anymore. And this is why we live in dangerous and very interesting and exciting times, quite honestly. That's why I continue to do this show. We had a few people that supported us. Let's go to the email box here. Yeah, read this, but it basically shows how 80% of the cash that the Federal Reserve is creating is actually going towards buying and appropriating real assets. So we have literally a transference of ownership societies being transferred into the central banks and into private unnamed banks that are basically just the deep state, some blanket organization, some investment group that you've never heard of, like Constellas. Let's see. We had John here. He is in Hillsboro, Oregon, who writes, "Keep up the great work. Where is Michael Vale? With all the wars, he could be a great interview, John." He sure would be. I'm trying to get a hold of him. He's had a lot of things going on. For you that don't know, he is the guy behind StratRisks.com, and a good friend of mine used to do the daily radio show with me as a co-host, and we did a show together for several years called the Intel Strike Report, and he's been a purveyor of a few different websites. So thank you, John. I appreciate that. $20. Let's see. That might have been all. Definitely need to garner more support for this show so that we can, give the time and invest the money that we do receive into what we're doing here instead of having to do other things, quite honestly, with time and resources. As limited as they are for you and everyone else that listens to this podcast, that is the case with myself. We do need financial and, of course, your social support by getting this out to more and more people. And the more time that we can allocate to the show, well, the more that we can support what we're doing with donations and outside of the corporate model, a value for value model. If you value the show, if you think it's more interesting than, I don't know, watching Saturday morning cartoons or going to the movie, if it's infotainment, that's fine. If it's infotaining, if you're becoming more informed and you get a few smiles. I know people don't like that term because it has a negative connotation, but it's no worse than truther radio, man. So, basically, we are not offended or afraid to get to the truth because we don't have corporate sponsors that are uninterested in that, or whoever they may be. We'll be honest with a review of a water filter or some other product or some service that we don't deem to be, necessarily legitimate or in our listeners' best interest. We don't sell your time, your time. That's what most people do. They're not really selling themselves out. They're selling you, the listener, out. They're selling your attention, your interest, your time to corporate advertisers for their own financial gain, which is not necessarily horribly evil, but it's not what we want to do. And I refuse to do it. No, we don't use threats like some shows. If we don't get it, then we're going to make you listen to snake oil salesmen, and you're going to have to get your own, colloidal silver air generator spots before the show, or we're going to beg for money for, exorbitant amounts of time, or turn this into an infomercial or a telethon. We're not going to do that, but we do need your support. So thank you so much for it. And the few of you out there, the elite, the brave, all of you listening to this podcast, thank you so much for doing so. I'll be back next Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time for another live edition of Blacklisted Radio. I hope you join me then, and until we meet again, take care.